friends of Fred, thank you all for coming on behalf of the Harris family. Thank you for being here today. If you're able, stand please as we listen to Fred's voice singing the Operica band song. So if you could please stand if you want to, if you're able. This is a
Yeah.
seated. Thank you. We're all here because we love Fred, and Fred loved us. He was a remarkable person, and we knew it. He taught us, he told us stories, and he made us laugh. Because of who Fred was, this memorial service has an additional purpose besides remembering him. Fred called himself a radical optimist, and we can remember and honor Fred by being radical optimists ourselves. This calls upon us to carry on the work Fred spent his life on, working for fairness and equality. Let us ask whatever divine spirit or higher power we believe in to help us never to forget these words in Fred's last book. I know this for sure. There is existential value in the struggle itself, and all of us must do what we can do.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Diane Denish, and I am a proud friend of Fred Harris and Marg's. Fred Harris had a wonderful life, full of radical optimism, life adventures, travels, friends in high places, and those of us in enchanted New Mexico. Oliver Lafarge once wrote, "We are New Mexicans by birth or by passionate adoption. And aren't we lucky that Fred Harris adopted New Mexico as his second home?" My first introduction came to Fred when I met Marg in the early, mid-'80s. And it was a casual introduction. But then in the early 90s, I was invited to visit what became known as the Borellis Athletic Club, where we exercised our art. We coined the phrase, I don't know if any of you are here, the repo and the enchiladas and the don't tell Marg about the chicharrones. Working with Marg and going to BAC translated into a decades-long friendship for Herb and I with Marg and Fred. But my guess is every single person in this audience has had a journey like that, which they recall with the greatest affection. I saw Fred when he was hospitalized for a few days after the election. It was one of those really rare moments to say thank you to someone who had an outsized influence on my life. I summoned the courage to say to him that his was such a life of such an incredible good. He came out of that poverty-stricken environment and he believed he could go to law school. He believed he could go to the Oklahoma legislature. He believed he could go to the U.S. Senate. And his greatest achievement, he believed he could be a beloved professor for hundreds of students in New Mexico. I thanked him as best I could in what we knew was limited time. And it was to say thank you for all of that, for all of us, and to thank him for his impact on my life as a friend and as an elected official. I want to share with you two personal stories about Fred in closing. A couple of things that stuck with me. The first was about the influence of those really early years of poverty on his later work. Herb and I and the Voorhees and Fred and Marg went to Spain together for a wonderful trip. Traveling with Fred and Marg was exciting, and you had to be ready to get up and keep up all day long. One day, after an early morning outing, we stopped for a little snack, even though we had already had a light breakfast. When we were almost finished, Fred started to think coming from. Fred also transcended generations, and in my family that was especially an event over the years for Fred and Marg and Herb and I. And when our grandchildren would come for summer Graham camp, as we called it, Fred and Marg always said, "Be sure and bring the grandkids to breakfast." At one of those breakfasts, Shep was, I think, maybe 5 years old, and in his very first year of Graham camp, Fred peppered him with questions. Who are your teachers? What are you doing? What are you learning? And at the end of the conversation, Shep turned to Fred very seriously and said, "Hey, Fred, I was thinking maybe you could come over for a play day one day. How about Now, I just want to invite you to hear Fred's laughter when Fred invited him to come to a play day. But it said something about Fred, that Fred saw everybody. Everybody was somebody for Fred. Age was no barrier, and play day was always possible. It was a gift to be a friend of Fred, as all of you know. In this last year and his extraordinary life, he was honored with the doctorate, the American Peace Experience Story, his new book, celebrating Marg's 80th birthday with great delight, and going to his 14th Democratic National Convention, and then establishing what we hope will be Fred's legacy. Not to be the end of an era, but the beginning of a legacy, the Fred Harris Congressional Internship Endowment, giving students from every walk of life the opportunity to see how government works, or as Fred said in one day when we were talking, or how it doesn't work sometimes. It was New Mexico's lucky day when Fred and all of his family. I'm so grateful, as I know you are. Here's to our friend Fred.
Weeks before his passing, he was with his Romeo buddies, entertaining us with everything from his political analysis of the recent election to his side-splitting funny stories. The servers who brought us our food could never have guessed that this man, who couldn't get enough of chicharrones and chile, had made such an outsized contribution to the history of his country. I first heard of Fred when I was contacted by the executive director of the 8 northern pueblos, asking if the New Mexico League of Latin American Citizens would support Taos Pueblo in its bid for the sacred Blue Lake. Our convention was scheduled to meet the following week in Corpus Christi, Texas. We knew from press reports and political gossip that our New Mexico Congressional delegation wasn't very warm to the idea. But we discussed it and decided that it was the right thing to do. On December the 15th, 54 years ago tomorrow, President Nixon signed into effect the law that approved the transfer of the 48,000 acres to Taos Pueblo. Fred's advocacy played a key role in righting that wrong. I finally met Fred soon after he came to teach at UNM. By then, I was well aware of his reputation as a United States Senator and a former member of President Johnson's in a pickup truck with feathers hanging from the rearview mirror. He wasn't exactly dressed to kill. Fred was decked out in khaki pants and an humble Mexican shirt, the Guayabera, his signature. We biked closer to home, to the Varela's Coffee House. Fred looked forward to eating thousands of calories worth of chicharrones, and then imagining that he could burn them off on the right back. But on one of these trips, I became more tired than usual. And Fred became convinced that there was something wrong. He insisted on calling Dayton Voorhees, our mutual primary care physician. In short, I ended up in Presbyterian Hospital undergoing a double bypass operation. That was Fred. He always had a way of reading people. Always reaching out if they seemed down. Always there to help people out and to cheer people up. Above all, Fred had a way of reading the signs of the times as well. As a member of the Kerner Commission, he argued that racism was at the root of the uprisings in our major American cities. The commission went on to conclude that our nation was moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Fred's vision for America free of discrimination is more relevant than ever, and for that we are grateful. Fred, may you rest in peace and enjoy your beloved chicharrones for all eternity.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here with you, seeing the smiles, the tears. It's a wonderful testament and tribute to Fred Harris. I'm Howard Morales, Lieutenant Governor. I'm proud to be here on behalf of Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, our entire cabinet in the state of New Mexico. Knowing Fred and the work that he did and the impact he had on all of our lives has been tremendous. And knowing him from traveling across the state, we got to know him by many names: Senator, Goodwill Ambassador, statesman, professor, or as when we traveled all around, Marg, Teresa Drahecki, other candidates campaigning across New Mexico, he became the Democratic Party chief of staff. And what we knew about Fred, that Fred had not one single mean bone in his body, where he stood strong on his policies and his beliefs. He always remembered to make sure that the people who may be opposed to what his beliefs were also human. Didn't mean that he wasn't human and he didn't have dislike for people, but rather than him coming across and saying that he disliked someone, he would use the phrases like, he has a high, low regard. And that is a testament to who Fred Harris is. At this time, I'd like to read a proclamation on behalf of the state of New Mexico. The State of New Mexico Executive Office in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Proclamation. Whereas we mourn the passing of Fred Harris, a devoted public servant, renowned professor, and dedicated advocate for civil rights and economic justice, whose legacy continues to impact our state and our nation. And whereas, born in Walters, Oklahoma, and raised on a farm, Fred Harris rose to national prominence as a U.S. Senator, having served 2 terms in championing bipartisan legislation, including the landmark return of the sacred Blue Lake lands to the people of Taos Pueblo, a crowning achievement of his illustrious career for civil rights. And whereas, after 2 presidential campaigns, Fred Harris found his second calling in the state of New Mexico, becoming a beloved professor at the University of New Mexico, where he inspired generations of students and founded the Fred Harris Congressional Internship Program, offering transformative opportunities to underprivileged youth. And whereas a prolific author and storyteller, Fred Harris continued to contribute significantly to our understanding of democracy, governance, and political discourse, reflecting his lifelong dedication to democracy, justice, and the empowerment of marginalized communities. And whereas Fred Harris's vision, humility, and unwavering commitment to systemic change made an impact on the New Mexico people and across the nation, fostering hope and opportunity for countless individuals. And whereas Fred Harris's impact was not just felt in his professional achievements, but also in his character. And whereas known for his warmth, generosity, and good humor, he was a man of honor who treated all people with respect and dignity, leaving behind a legacy of leadership for public officials to emulate. And whereas I extend my deepest condolence to the family, friends, and colleagues of Fred Harris, whose immense contributions to New Mexico and the nation will not be forgotten. And whereas Fred Harris passed away on Saturday, November 23rd, 2024, at the age of 94. Now, therefore, I, Michelle Lujan Grisham, Governor of the state of New Mexico, do hereby proclaim Fred Harris a New Mexico treasure, attested by Maggie Toulouse Oliver, Secretary of State, done on the executive office on the 4th day of December, 2024. Witness my hand and the Great Seal of the State of New Mexico, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. At this time, I'd also like to read a certificate of authenticity that reads, Senator Fred Harris, by official decree of the governor, the New Mexico state flag was flown on the grounds of the state capitol in your honor. Thank you so much.
Theo, num doi wai no. Chiu to, num pui wai, familiar chiu yung tau, o kon pobe, yuna kishen wai, per kuga. O royal web kiu doma, yuna po web fauna, on fair kupu, yung tu, yama, on. There's so many different situations and practice our culture or religion. And to us, that's our church, is Blue Lake and the wilderness area. So I am greatly appreciative of all the hard work that him and his whole team has done. With our forefathers, a lot of them are not with us right now, but they did a lot of hard work. And with that, I opened up in our language because by now, I know he understands our language. Anyway, we have a proclamation from Taos Pueblo here. So it reads as Memorial Proclamation for Senator Fred Harris for the work on the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo. Whereas Taos Force Reserve, and whereas this action began the struggle that was to last 64 years through numerous Taos Pueblo administrations and generations, and the Taos Pueblo people, and into the it be resolved that on behalf of our people, we, the tribal government of Taos Pueblo, proclaim our deep appreciation for Senator Fred Harris' leadership and able justice to be served through the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo. It is further resolved that Taos Pueblo extends its deep appreciation to the family of Senator Fred Harris for their support of his diligent work in the return of Blue Lake to the Taos Pueblo. Therefore, the Memorial Proclamation was presented to the family of Senator Fred Harris on the 14th day of December, 2024. Signed, Governor Fred L. Romero, War Chief Carpio Bernal. Thank you, everyone. I have Mr. Carpio Bernal here. He wants to say a few words here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Nam dayo ein chiu mai. Chiu yu na it ai in haba kim kawan. Te tatin iwa in kim dayo ein chiu top it all sa maho. Haba nunam kim boy in chiu top it all sa maho yan te hawani yan te nuna sa na mabu amo. Tomana tobana tomana. Kalkunang tomana tubea. Ito sa maho haba namo en tenente tabu tekhu tenente tekhu khumsa tekhu mana te sa ma ito sa maho no ko queen no pia thai no ko queen. This afternoon I'd like to take a little time, not much of your time, but I want to thank Mr. Senator Fred Harris from the great state of Oklahoma for all you and all the people that are in here today. May the Great Spirit watch over you, protect you, and guide you. Paul Bernal and the cacique and the vice president. So it's an honor to be here, growing up with the man that interpreted our language, the Tiwa language, Paul J. Bernal. I grew up watching him, learning from him. So I'm honored here as a family member from the Paul J. Bernal family and being a war chief this year, protecting the lands that Mr. Harris fought for. It was an honor to do that. This is my father and LaDonna Harris. And she came to our Blue Lake celebration. And I want to thank her dearly from my heart. Bless you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gilbert Salazo. I'm a councilman at Taos Pueblo. In 1970, I was a young man in Washington, D.C., supporting my tribal elders, my tribal councilmen who were there fighting for the return of our sacred Blue Lake. I was there as a representative of the younger generation of Taos Pueblo, to demonstrate to the people over there that there was a younger generation that was behind our elders that was fighting for this land. And when I was there is when I learned about this good man from Oklahoma, an Oklahoma Senator, Fred Harris, that was working on our behalf in Congress, in the Senate. You know, I had not met him yet, but I heard his name. And as that year went on, 1970, a very important year, I heard his name a lot, of somebody that was standing on our behalf to confront the opposition that we were getting from other senators in the Senate. And you know, being from another state, from Oklahoma, how did he happen to get interested in our cause? You know, an Indian tribe in New Mexico that has been fighting for its land for 64 years. And I really feel like LaDonna, you know, had a lot to do with, you know, his getting interested in what we were fighting for here. Being a Native American person, she could understand what we were fighting for and why. And the good senator, he picked up on that and he led the fight in the Senate. And lo and behold, on December the 5th, there was a vote in the Senate by a vote of 70 to 12. House Pueblo's Blue Lake bill passed. Much of the work. Much of the work being, he didn't seek credit there on Taos Pueblo land. A beautiful, pristine area that is up there. All of that is, I look at it as one of the most visible work of people like Senator Harris, people like LaDonna Harris, people like Bobby Green Kilburg, who was a White House fellow during that time. And of course, the president at that time, President Nixon, who on a day like tomorrow, December the 15th, signed the Blue Lake bill as he pledged to do so in our meeting with him on July the 8th, 1970. So it took all this effort of all of these people. But you know, I was, look at the good senator and the work that he did in the Senate there. That's what it took, you know, somebody had to take the lead in there. And he did on our behalf. And we are forever thankful for the work that he did for us. And God bless his soul. My condolences to the family. Thank you for supporting him all during that time that he was busy with our cause. Thank you.
In conclusion, on our part from Taos Pueblo, thank you, everyone, the family. Thank you for watching over Mr. Fred Harris and taking care of him and supporting him in all his endeavors. Thank you very much.
I'm honored the family of Professor Harris asked me to speak today. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to talk about a man for whom I have deep love and respect. Regardless of how we knew him, what we called him, professor, senator, chairman, mentor, honorary doctoral recipient, he was our friend. Back in 1994, I took a political science course taught by Professor Harris. Deep into the semester, I was riveted by his lectures and never missed a class, which is a big deal for an undergraduate, I'll say. A decade later, I saw Fred Harris at a campaign rally right here at the National Hispanic Cultural Center, and I introduced myself to him again, this time as a first-year law student. He acted like he remembered me because he was so kind, right? 1,000 students, and he acted like he remembered me, of course, and that's because students were important to him. I mentioned that the reason I decided to apply to law school in the first place was inspired by his formative lectures. I believe that motivating students to believe in themselves and push the boundaries of their capabilities is the best trait of a professor. And since 2019, I have been welcoming Fred Harris interns into my offices to honor their accomplishments. The internship program he founded has influenced a great many students to take career paths rooted in public service. In our world, as it is today, there is no greater testament to the influence and value that Fred Harris has brought to New Mexico and our country than his impact on our youth. Through the years, Professor Harris and I became good friends. In 2014, he supported my run for Lieutenant Governor of New Mexico. And the following year, he nominated me when I ran successfully for New Mexico State Democratic Party chair. Up to 2024, we had been through pretty much every election cycle together. including several national conventions. Were it not for him, I 76 presidential campaign. Back then, he ran as a progressive who championed issues of human rights and income inequality. One of his campaign slogans was "Take the rich off welfare." Still relevant today. I adopted that slogan on political buttons that I made myself, and I handed him out with joy. To me, his most meaningful accomplishments stemmed from his belief that for Indigenous people, our land and water is everything. The legislation he championed to help Taos Pueblos see the return of their Blue Lake was environmental justice in action, and I will be grateful for this monumental event for the rest of my life. For all who have known Fred, it is clear that his values were always a constant. Regardless of what office any of us were running for or what policies we were working on through the years, Fred Harris was our guide. His perspective always mattered, and his words were words we could always live by. I am proud that many decades ago, Fred Harris chose to make New Mexico his home. Our state has benefited greatly from his teachings, his relentless pursuit of social justice, and his devotion to democratic values, but most of all, his smile and unwavering friendship to those of us lucky enough to know him stands as a beacon of light. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Very well, Uncle Fred.
Fred would have said, go get him, kid. I can literally hear that in my mind. Good afternoon. I'm Maggie Toulouse-Oliver. I'm honored to serve as Secretary of State, and I'm honored to say that a lot of the reason that I've been able to have an almost 20-year career in public service is because of Fred Harris. I'm going to say some things today that sound a lot familiar to my good amiga and friend Deb Holland, Secretary Holland, and to the Lieutenant Governor who is here. But first, I just want to thank the family for inviting me. I love you all so much. You all, Laura, Catherine, LaDonna, Marg, you've all had such an important role in my life in different ways. I'm gonna get really emotional, sorry. But it is an honor to be here today to help honor our friend, mentor, and beloved family member, Fred Harris. Again, as we all know, Fred was many things. He was husband, father, U.S. Senator, party chairman, chief of staff, to Marg especially. And he was many things to many of us. And I feel so lucky that I can include myself in that. Because Fred Harris helped make me who I am today. In that vein, I want to focus on who Fred was as a teacher and mentor. And boy, he was a great one. Like Secretary Holland, although a few years after her, I was an undergraduate student at the University of New Mexico. Sorry, that was not meant as an insult. I'm constantly following in Deb's footsteps. We both graduated from Highland, a few years apart, and then we took classes from Fred Harris a few years apart. So, that was meant to honor you, Deb. But I was an undergraduate at UNM about 25 years ago when Fred was still teaching political science. And I was a young mom. I had a toddler, and he would even let me bring my young son to class, and my totally just needy, incorrigible toddler would just sit there and draw while I was in class. But that was Fred. He let me get my education and also be a mom. And we were like, blah, 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 and for me, like a young political science nerd, it was everything. And how lucky were we, the hundreds of us as his students, to be able to get that experience, to hear those direct experiences and those stories and those anecdotes. And I would just want to stay after class and keep asking him questions, even though I know he just wanted to get the heck out of there, But it was his stories about helping to pass Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, particularly the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, that inspired me the most in my work. And for those of you who may not be aware, basically my work is voting. Making sure people can vote, ensuring that the vote happens, counting the votes. And those stories really, especially about the Voting Rights Act, just really ingrained themselves in me. And I was so lucky to learn from him and to hear really direct from the source how the process happened and how, it almost didn't happen, right? And especially in these times, I think it's just so important to keep in mind how meaningful it is that we have enshrined these rights and that there are people out there that will continue to do that, and Fred Harris helped inspire that in me. Later, as I was a graduate student in political science, and by the way, I've been on like a 20-year plan to get my PhD. So I know the poli-sci crew is here somewhere. I want to give you a shout out, and hi guys. I'm still working, I'm starting that dissertation like in January. Partly because Fred Harris inspired me. But I was fortunate enough to serve as his graduate assistant. And, I continued to learn so much from him, particularly how much I hated grading exams and papers. But no, just kidding. He was just an amazing mentor, a caring and engaged teacher, not just to me, but to so many. I know, Secretary Holland and I speak for so many in this room and who are watching on the live stream. That were students of his. I remember just a few years ago, Fred asked me what my plans were after my current job, and I told him I was thinking of following in his footsteps and becoming a professor, and I'm telling you, like, the joy on his face, the ebullience, just like, again, oh, great kid, that's so great, I just loved it. He's just so encouraging, and He was just, you know, when Fred Harris is in your corner, you felt like you could do anything, right? So, as has already been mentioned, in addition to helping a generation of New Mexicans learn and understand how Congress works, he established that Congressional Internship program in his name, which is a crown jewel for the University of New Mexico. And Marg, I know you're working so hard to ensure that that program continues to be endowed. And I think if we do anything, let's continue to support that program because it is so meaningful and it is such a big deal for so many. So, with all of that said, Fred he was many things indeed. And I know I speak for many of us here today when I say I was incredibly lucky to know him, to be his student, to be mentored by him, to be cared about by him and supported by him. To have Fred in your corner, as I said before, was to feel fully and completely supported. Fred, we will all miss your enthusiastic support and encouragement every day.
Are the musicians here? Here they come, okay. They're going to be able to sing a song that's in your program, I'll Fly Away. So open up your programs. It's the first song, I'll Fly Away, will be led by these wonderful musicians. seated.
Howdy ho, everybody. My name is Jim Hightower, and I want to thank the extended Harris family, LaDonna and Marg and several rows up here up front, for allowing a scrawny Texas populace to come in here across the border without even being tipped. I appreciate the governor's permission there to allow me to be a part of this no more bullshit rendezvous of us dedicated, devoted Fredistas. You know, Oscar Wilde once said, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. When you could not be more yourself than Fred Ray Harris, or as he was known by the right wing in Oklahoma, Fred Red Harris. I knew Fred before I knew him as a college student in 1964 at the University of North Texas, safely on the Texas side of the Red River. I watched this feisty young maverick from red dirt rural Oklahoma take on Bud Wilkinson, the most famous football coach in America at that time, and to take on the Republican establishment, but even bigger than that, to take on the powers that be in our country on behalf of the powers that ought to be, the ordinary workaday people of our country. And when I say the powers that be, I'm talking about what I call the 6 Bs, the bosses, the bankers, the billionaires, big shots, bastards, and bullshitters. Fred did that in Oklahoma, and he won, to the astonishment of our establishment over there. And let me just say something remarkable. He carried every rural county in Oklahoma, which is virtually every county in Oklahoma. But Fred didn't back off once he got to Washington, got inside the power structure. Of course, the lobbyists and the Democratic Party establishment and the political consultants all swarmed in and said, now, Fred, you were pretty rambunctious in that campaign, but now you've got to just kind of go along to get along. They said, go with the flow. Well, Fred had done a bit of fishing in the creeks down around Walters, Oklahoma, and he knew that dead fish can go with the flow. So he took on everything that's been mentioned here this afternoon: civil rights, labor, environmentalism, farmers, women's rights, corporate power. And he was out front, not just watching him, and later myself going to Washington and working with him, I learned an invaluable political lesson for a budding political figure, that the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity. And Fred did not travel all the way to Washington, D.C. to conform to the corporate system. So he was a rebel. He embraced and he embodied the slogan of an old Austin motel right on South Congress Avenue near where I live in Austin, Texas. It had a big marquee out front that said, no additives, no preservatives, corporate free, since 1938. And Fred beat that by corporate free since 1930. But he was also a model of how to talk populism. Not DC gobbledygookism, not policy wonkism, not senatorial pomposityism. Fred spoke people, pure and simple, with 3 main characteristics. He told stories, first of all, because that's how people learn and that's how they hear things. After all, Martin Luther King Jr., he did not say, I have a position paper. Fred understood the wisdom of that. Secondly, Mr. Humor was Fred's good friend, and he embraced humor with all possibilities. And he would advise any budding politician to whatever little humor you have within you, turn that little sucker loose. Because there cannot be enough of it. And thirdly, he spoke plainly and with passion. This added up to that honest grassroots of the people presidential run in 1976. At the very start, he nailed the campaign manifesto right on the White House gate. The issue is privilege, he said. Too few people control too much of the money and power, and they use that control to get more for themselves at our expense. He brought that radical reality to every campaign stop. I was with him, for example, in one stop in Omaha, Nebraska, and we were having a little rally, a little reception in a rich person's home. Frankly, we didn't have a lot of rich people supporting us, but when we did, we promised to try to take over their home once the revolution more or less. Everywhere, and this very well-heeled attendee started lecturing Fred, grumping that government giveaways to labor had to be cut back. We had to cut government spending. And he allowed us how garbage men in Omaha were being paid $5 an hour to haul garbage. And Fred interrupted him and glared at him for a couple of minutes, seemed like. And then he shoved that comment right back in the guy's face. He said, "Is that too much? How much would it take you to do that job?" Well, the guy left in a huff, but Fred won a lot of respect for no more bullshit campaigning. The blunt political honesty like that is what a no more bullshit campaign is all about, and we need a lot more of it. Fred, of course, literally wrote the book on democratic populism. Didn't take him a lot of library research to put it together because he was born and raised in it. He lived and practiced it for 94 years. So now, the Democratic Party, which he led, urgently needs to rehitch its future to the principles, the policies, and the people of Fred Harris populism. One final story from Fred's boyhood. As a boy, just about 6 years old, he told me once, living there on that hardscrabble tenant farm at Walters, Oklahoma. His dad housed him and a couple of cousins up out of bed before daylight because they needed to go out and get the horses out to line them up, ready to be hitched to the plows or other farm equipment that's going to be used that day. But first, Fred's God-fearing mother insisted that they all come into the kitchen and have a prayer. And Mama prayed, and Mama prayed, and Mama prayed. And Dad got itchier as daylight began to ebb forward. And finally, Mama said, so Fred will be forever saying to us progressives in particular, hitch 'em up, we got work to do. And it's just been my honor and joy over a lot of years to have worked with Fred Harris. And I'll leave you with these two words that I think are Fred's message to all of us. Spread Fred.
So we have our last song. We're going to finish with the song that was chosen specifically because it was felt that this is really Fred loves this song and he loves the words and the feelings and the sense of the song. So we're going to sing 3 verses of it. And maybe we'll do something extra. What is this? Campaign. I didn't know that. Okay, he used this for his campaign. Maybe you guys knew that. So we have a nice line of history here with this song.
Let's hear it for Freddie.
Light refreshments, a brief reception in the education building, which is the building over north behind us. So thank you all for being here, and please join and the family and talk to them further. Thank you.
Environmental one.